Chapter 3.
Cassia headquarters, may I help you?
Autumn sat in the main lobby of the Galimarian Space Exploration Agency, busily answering incoming calls and taking messages. One of the more interesting ways communications happened in Galimarian society was that most everyone had a communications device which sat in the ear canal. Also, one of the optional features was a contact lens that contained millions of photoelectric cells. The net result was not only could they make and receive calls with no discernible device, but they also had the ability to receive and look up information on the Planetary Information Network. If the incoming call was a video call, they could even see the face of the person they were talking to. Whenever Autumn came to work, her station sensed her presence and gave her the ability to log in and receive calls for Cassia on her own personal communications system. To the untrained, it looked as if she were sitting at a desk, talking to herself all day.
One moment, please, while I connect you.
On a panel in front of her were controls she used to route calls to the proper destination. Pressing one or two buttons, her present call was transferred to the proper destination, and she would move on to the next. Between calls, she looked up and saw someone standing in front of her. Directing her gaze at the visitor's unremarkable clothes, she instantly sized him up as a tourist and knew she wasn't going to allow him to get anywhere here.
May I help you?
Yes, I'd like to speak with Aobach Aramine, please, said the visitor. Autumn was very good at her job, knowing she was the first line of defense against anybody coming in and bothering the inhabitants of the space agency. She also knew if this person were someone Aobach was expecting, he would know a special name Aobach gave out to his expected visitors. That special name, Bach, was a shortened form of his name. This visitor was obviously not someone Aobach knew.
I'm sorry, Lord...
Telendor. Krelon Telendor. Inwardly, the receptionist smiled. First of all, she knew the distinguished Lord Krelon Telendor had no reason to come to Cassia. Lord Telendor was an archivist, a rather famous one at that, and archivists had no need to come to the space agency. Secondly, if this guy were Lord Telendor, he most certainly would be dressed better than this. It's not like he was a slob, but still, she knew a person of Lord Telendor's stature would be dressed differently. She had to admit she had never seen a photo of the real Lord Telendor, but this guy didn't fit her profile of a notable person.
I'm sorry, but Lord Aramine isn't available. I'd be happy to take a message for him.
This wasn't the first time this happened to Krelon. As a life choice, Krelon dressed minimally, and so most prejudged him to be young and not very notable. In doing so, they would also be very wrong. Not only was Krelon almost 6,000 years old, but he was a very well-known archivist, a Galimar profession that commanded much respect from society. Since it is the responsibility of archivists to keep and maintain the history of the Galimarian people, most looked to them as the keepers of knowledge. They spent their entire lives not only learning where Galimarian society had come from, but were also the ones who people looked to for the wisdom that comes from being taught by the ancients. Krelon had distinguished himself early in his career by not only being very versed in the ancestry of the Galimarian society, but also with its social evolution. While Galimar was an amazingly enlightened society, it wasn't always that way. For a long time, it was theorized that Galimarian society, as it is today, was born from a society very different. When Krelon graduated from his higher education, prevailing opinions suggested Galimar had several different nations which were very nationalistic and very argumentative with each other. Some even suggested these nations actually went to war with each other, over topics that didn't really matter, even though they were all Galimarians. This was very different from current thinking patterns, so these types of theories were generally discredited. The idea that these theories were all unsubstantiated and didn't merit serious study came to a crashing end when Krelon led a team of archaeologists to a remote area of the planet where a lost city was discovered. This was the lost city of Galix, one of the last cities their civilization lived in before the Great Age of Enlightenment. Before this discovery, Galimarian pursuits were largely built on personal endeavors and wealth. By decoding unearthed books and literature, it was evident this attitude led to strife, jealousy, and tremendous social unrest. As Galix was explored more and more, it started to give up its secrets as to how its inhabitants played a major role in helping shape the Great Age of Enlightenment. Before this, it wasn't very clear what triggered society to progress as it did. Needless to say, the name Krelon Telendar was known far and wide. The odd thing was there weren't too many pictures of the man, since he was much more interested in his work than in his fame. The fact that this receptionist knew his name, but not his face, wasn't surprising. Krelon said in a very pointed manner, "Miss, I suggest you get up, go to his office, and tell him the key to his mission to Eden is standing in front of your desk." Looking at the man standing in front of her, Autumn wondered whether she should do as he asked. She decided to reroute incoming calls, get up from her desk, and at least make the appearance of compliance. Without a word, she stood up from her desk and disappeared behind a locked door. On the other side of the door, she said, "Oh boy." "What's up?" said an office worker who was making some copies. "This tourist standing at my desk claims he's Krelon Telendor, but I'm telling you, there's no way this guy is Lord Telendor." "Really? He's at your desk?" "Yeah. Here, look through the window and the door. See what I mean?" The other office worker walked over and looked through the window, and when she did, her face went white. What the receptionist didn't know was the office worker had been trained as an archivist in her own higher education. She later decided not to pursue that career, since there were so many others who were significantly smarter and wiser. One of the most significant individuals she had studied was Krelon Telendor, the same Krelon Telendor she was now staring at through the window. Turning to Autumn, she spoke slowly and carefully. "I suggest that if you want to keep your job, you not only walk, but perhaps run to Eobach's office and get him here now." "You don't really think that? Get him here now." The now ashen-faced Autumn turned and immediately fled to the office of Lord Aramin. Normally, she would knock before entering, but she was no longer worried about such pleasantries. She was just hoping not to be disciplined for her poor treatment of the visitor. Eobach was in a meeting with the Vice-Chancellor of Gasia, talking about how the meeting in the Grand Council chambers had gone, so the interruption was not very well received by the Vice-Chancellor. "What in the name of—" the receptionist interrupted. "Lord Aramin, there's a Lord Telendor here asking for you. Lord Krelon Telendor?" At that moment you could hear a pin drop in Eobach's office. He looked at the Vice-Chancellor, and the Vice-Chancellor looked back at Eobach. Without another word, it was instantly understood that this meeting was adjourned. Eobach stood and quickly followed the receptionist to the front lobby. He walked over to the visitor and stuck out his hand. Autumn tried her best to reverse whatever opinion the visitor might have due to her previous behavior. "Lord Aramin, this distinguished gentleman is Lord Krelon Telendor. Lord Telendor, this is Lord Eobach Aramin," said Autumn. "You can just call me Bach. I'm pleased to meet you. And you can just call me Krelon. Your skilled receptionist here made me feel quite welcome." "I'm very glad to hear that." Behind Eobach and out of his sight, Autumn was powerfully relieved Krelon had decided to handle the situation as graciously as he did. She silently mouthed a thank you to Krelon. He responded with a slight nod of his head, showing himself to be a down-to-earth, gracious man. She now instantly understood why he chose the garb he did. He was unpretentious, and she knew he didn't have the need to put on airs to anyone. So to what do I owe the honor of your visit? Asked Eobach.
Autumn returned to her station at the front desk, and the two men walked over to a couch and chair located near them in the lobby. Krelon spoke.
I saw the broadcast of your speech in the Grand Council. I have to say I was very impressed with what you said. If I didn't know better, it almost seemed like you weren't using any notes. Actually, I wasn't. I had a lot of notes. But as I was walking up to the podium, the deliberations which occurred over the proposals before mine caused me to change the overall direction of my speech. I'm not sure what the overall effect was, though. I was just in a meeting with the Vice-Chancellor of Gacia telling him I wasn't sure whether I helped or hindered the cause. Oh, I'm sorry. If I'm keeping you from your meeting, I can come back. No. That meeting is now over. You're fine. I feel like I'm so close to getting the proposal passed, but I just don't know what I can do to push them over the edge. Perhaps I can help with that, replied Krelon.
For a split second, Eobach wondered what an archivist could do. Perhaps Krelon had friends in high places who might influence? But no, that wouldn't be the case. Influencing members of the Grand Council was a crime, and nobody dared to try it.
I'm not sure I follow you. How would you be able to help with that?
Well, replied Krelon, I thought that I would like to go. With you. I'd like to sign on as a crew member on your starship. At this point, Eobach would normally direct the inquiry to the personnel office and allow the inquirer to fill out paperwork. In this case, he was absolutely stunned. With his heart beating in his throat, Eobach took a double, then triple take at Krelon, finally managing to croak out a reply.
You want to go on the voyage to Eden?
Yes, I do. Do you think you'd have room for me? Eobach was reeling at the thought. Basically, all he could do was blurt out the first thing that came to his mind.
We'll make room.
The two men looked at each other, realizing the agreement they had just made sealed the fate of next week's vote in the Grand Council. At that realization, Eobach simply let out a lone huff. After a few moments, he was the first to speak.
You do realize that, with your backing, the decision on whether to approve the mission proposal will most likely pass.
Krelon smiled.
That thought did occur to me. Well,
said Eobach,
that makes you my new best friend.
The two men laughed out loud, loud enough for Autumn to look up and wonder whether they were talking about her faux pas. There weren't any glances her way, so she decided her job was hopefully intact.
I do have a question about how long it will take to build the starship and get to the point where the mission will leave Galimar, asked Krelon.
Eobach loved fielding this question. He loved the reaction he always got.
If we get approval to start the project next week, we should be able to start construction of the ship the following month. At that point, we should be leaving about 2 months later. 2 months? Have you already started the building of the ship in secret? Asked Krelon in a very surprised tone.
No, answered Eobach, smiling rather enigmatically.
The ship doesn't exist at all yet.
Then, how?
Forgive me, Krelon, for having a little sport at your expense. Let me explain. You see, there is a little-known technology Gacia has developed called the Builder Robot technology. These builder robots employ artificial intelligence and are used to do the actual building of the ship in orbit. Galimarian hands don't ever touch the ship during its construction. Raw materials come from orbiting asteroids and are smelted by fully autonomous and automated foundries located on each asteroid body. Once smelted, the metals and other materials are then transported to the construction site by robot transport and fashioned into the parts needed for the ship itself. The builder robots all follow a master plan, which is uploaded and updated from our offices here at Ground Control. Master robotics engineers on the ground communicate to the robots in orbit. The real genius, though,
is that the robots have the ability to replicate and build more of themselves to get the job done. As a result, work is relentless and is being done on the ship every hour of every day and night. I imagine it might look like a swarm of millions of crawling creatures all converging in one spot. I plan on keeping a video camera trained on the ship as it is built in order to watch my dream materialize before my eyes. But 2 months? Asked Krelon incredulously. Yes, 2 months. Conceivably 2 months from now, we could be preparing to leave, replied Eobach. Looking at Krelon, he began to worry if that was more than Krelon was willing to accept. Is that a problem for you? Looking over from the window where he had been staring, Krelon replied, Oh no, that isn't a problem at all. I just wasn't expecting that sort of timeline. Relieved, Eobach replied, Good. Then, in that case, I would like to ask a favor of you.